The rain had followed Daniel for hours. Sheets of water hammered the windshield, the wipers dragging slow, exhausted arcs. The GPS had died 20 minutes ago, frozen on a loading screen. His phone had no signal. The gas gauge needle pressed uncomfortably close to empty. Then, through the blur of rain and fog, a glow appeared. A building, 4 stories high, ivy crawling up its sides like veins, windows boarded from the outside. But the sign above the entrance flickered weakly, casting pale light into the storm. The Hollow Pines Hotel. Daniel didn't remember deciding to pull over. One moment, the highway stretched endless. The next, he was parking in front of the lobby doors. The rain stopped the instant he stepped out of the car, as though the world had turned down the volume. The lobby doors opened without his touch. Inside, the air was warm. A chandelier flickered with soft yellow bulbs. The floor was polished, reflecting light like glass. The place looked alive, not abandoned, and at the front desk, a clerk stood waiting. His face was forgettable, so forgettable that even as Daniel looked at him, the details slipped away. He remembered a smile, maybe, and a voice that didn't echo even in the cavernous lobby. "Welcome, sir," the clerk said softly. "Checking in?" Daniel opened his mouth to refuse, but the clerk was already sliding a brass key across the counter. The tag bore Daniel's name. He wasn't alone. As Daniel reached for the key, the lobby doors opened again. A woman in her 30s stumbled in, dripping wet despite the sudden dry air. She clutched a leather purse to her chest, eyes wide, her voice shaking. Did the storm just stop?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, same for me." Before he could say more, another guest entered. A tall man with a backpack, camera gear slung over his shoulder, glancing around with suspicion written in every line of his face. Behind him came a younger woman, maybe 20, her sneakers muddy, her expression dazed like she'd just woken from a dream. The 4 of them stood together in the warm lobby, dripping water on the polished floor, each looking as lost as the others. The clerk smiled again. "Perfect. You've all arrived." He laid out. The clerk tilted his head. "You made a reservation." "Long ago." Leah shook her head. "No, I didn't." But when she reached for the key, her hand trembled, and she didn't stop herself. She picked it up, staring at her name engraved on the tag as though it had always been there. The clerk gestured toward the grand staircase. "Your rooms are ready. Enjoy your stay." Daniel tried to protest, but the words stuck in his throat. Something heavy pressed against his chest. Imagine it, pointing to the valley that took her in when she heard just something, like a whisper and a distant, unnerving sense, burning storm for it. The man down the hall meant an ordinary man felt his head tumble into the street and change suddenly. He was standing where he was, and the pressure Daniel had to push from himself was nothing new. And whisper, off into the abyss. Just an invisible weight urging him forward. The others moved slowly. The staircase rose wide and elegant, its red carpet muffling every step. The four of them climbed in silence, glancing at one another, like strangers forced together on a broken elevator. No one asked the question aloud. Why are we still moving? But the thought sat heavy on each of them. At the landing, the hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. The wallpaper was patterned with faint vines, the lamps along the walls flickering with a golden glow. Doors lined the corridor, each brass number shining as if freshly polished. Daniel stopped at room 206. His key slid into the lock without hesitation, as though the door had been waiting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something more intimate. His grandmother's perfume. The lamp on the nightstand glowed soft, revealing a room impossibly familiar. On the dresser sat a photograph. Daniel's heart lurched. It was him at 8 years old, holding the baseball glove his father had given him. But the photo had never existed. He remembered the day, the glove, the summer heat, but no one had been there to take a picture. He backed away, breath shallow. Sarah opened her own door down the hall. Room 214. The moment she stepped in, she froze. The bedspread was the same floral pattern she and her late husband had in their first apartment. On the nightstand, ticking faintly, lay his watch, the one she had buried him with 2 years ago. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. She whispered his name, but the empty room didn't answer. Marcus's room was darker. Room 220. The curtains were drawn, and the television flickered blue with static. On the desk, a single VHS tape waited, labeled in black marker, Marcus. Against his better judgment, he pushed it into the player. The screen rolled, then steadied. Grainy footage appeared. Himself, lying in this very bed, sound asleep. His chest rose and fell in time with his own breath, though he stood watching. The Marcus on screen stirred, rolled over, bent, and opened his eyes, looking directly at the camera, directly at him. The television cut to static, and Leah's room, 208, felt warm at first. Too warm, like an oven left on. Toys were scattered on the floor. Dolls, a plastic tea set, crayons. Her chest tightened. They were hers. The exact toys from her childhood bedroom. Worn the same way. Broken in the same places. On the wall, taped with peeling corners, was a drawing she remembered making at 6 years old. A house, a tree, and a figure scribbled in black crayon standing in the window. Back then, she had insisted it was her imaginary friend. But the drawing now showed the hotel, and the black figure stood in her window. They reconvened in the hallway an hour later, pale, shaken. No one wanted to describe what they'd seen, but it didn't matter. Their eyes told the truth. "This place," Daniel began, his voice hoarse. "It knows us." The hallway lights flickered once, in agreement, and down the hall, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open, though no one had pressed the button. Inside, the chandelier light gleamed on polished brass. The same clerk's voice drifted through the corridor, though no figure appeared. "Dinner is served." The elevator carried them down in silence. None of them pressed a button. It simply chose a floor on its own. The ride was smooth, too smooth, like gliding on water instead of cables. When the doors opened, they stepped into a dining hall bathed in golden light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their glow caught in mirrors that lined the walls. A long oak table stretched the length of the room, already set with steaming plates of food, roasts, bread, wine, bowls of fruit, everything laid out in excess. No one had cooked it, no one had served it, but every plate was half-eaten, as though they had already sat down and begun. Leah's voice cracked. I don't remember eating any of this." Sarah set her trembling hands on the table, staring at her plate. A slice of apple pie, exactly the way her husband used to make it, sat waiting. She picked up the fork without thinking. A bite had already been taken. Marcus scanned the portraits lining the walls. At first they were strangers, men in stiff collars, women in lace. Then, as he walked along, the faces shifted. Slowly, subtly, they began to resemble the four of them. The final portrait, nearest the head of the table, showed Marcus himself, painted in dark oils, his eyes wide and hollow. His stomach turned. He grabbed a chair and hurled it to the ground. The crash echoed through the room, rattling the chandeliers. The portraits all blinked at once. Daniel shot to his feet. "We need to get out, right now." As if on cue, the doors at the far end of the hall creaked open. The same clerk stood there, his smile faint, his face already slipping from memory as soon as they looked away. "Please," he said warmly, "don't leave dinner unfinished." Behind him, the hallway stretched into darkness. The air that drifted in was cold, stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew and old stone. Sarah whispered, "What's down there?" The clerk tilted his head. "The rest of your stay." The chandelier lights flickered, one by one, until only a single bulb glowed above them. The table was bare now. No food, no plates. Only their 4 keys lay neatly in the center, gleaming under the weak light. And next to them sat the guest ledger, open to the last page. 4 blank spaces waited. They left the dining hall together, but the corridor beyond was no longer the same. Where the lobby should have been, a laundry room stretched out. Rusted washers, heaps of gray sheets stacked like bodies. When they doubled back, the hall had changed again. The staircase was gone, replaced by a narrow passage that sloped downward. Marcus cursed under his breath. This place is shifting. Daniel ran his hand along the wallpaper. Beneath the faint vine patterns, the wall pulsed, soft, like flesh. He pulled his hand back quickly. The lights above flickered. In the split-second darkness, the hallway stretched impossibly long, like a tunnel. In the next flicker, it was short again, walls closing in. Sarah clutched her husband's watch, holding it like a talisman. It doesn't want us to leave. It's keeping us here. Leah stepped ahead, her sneakers squeaking against the floor. At the end of the hall stood a door. Brass, she bolted. The others shouted after her, but she didn't stop. She threw the door open and found herself back in her own room. Toys on the floor, the drawing of the hotel taped to the wall. Her scream echoed through the hallway until the door slammed shut. The three remaining ran to reach her, but the hall bent sideways, splitting into two. When Daniel and Sarah tried to follow, Marcus found himself alone, the passage behind him gone. The air grew thick, buzzing faintly with electricity. From the vents above, a whisper crawled out, soft and smooth. "Stay a while. You've already paid." The lights died completely. Daniel struck a match with shaking fingers. The brief flare lit the hall. For a heartbeat, he saw them, not just himself and Sarah, but dozens of other guests, pale and silent, filling the corridor. Some still wore 1950s suits, others 1970s dresses. Their eyes were dark, empty sockets. The match burned out. Darkness swallowed everything again. When the lights returned, they weren't in the hallway anymore. Daniel and Sarah stood in the lobby, though neither remembered walking there. The chandelier glowed faintly overhead, casting long shadows across the polished floor. At the front desk, the ledger sat open, pages turning on their own, as though blown by a wind that didn't exist. Marcus stumbled in from the opposite side, pale, sweating. His hands shook as he pointed at the desk. "Don't go near it. Don't." But Daniel was already staring at the book. Each page was filled with names written in perfect script. Columns of guests stretching back decades: 1931, 1961, 1991. Groups of four, always four. Some names were crossed out, others smudged into illegibility. But the pattern remained. 4 arrivals, 4 rooms, 4 keys. The last page was still blank. 4 empty lines. The ink quivered. Slowly, as if written by an invisible hand, the first name appeared. Marcus. His breath caught. No. No, no, no. He bolted for the front door, slamming against it with his shoulder. The glass shattered outward, shards raining onto the porch, only for the lobby itself to be on the other side. He stumbled back inside, the door swinging closed behind him. The ledger's second line filled. Sarah. She dropped her husband's watch as if it burned her. The ticking echoed through the room, louder than her heartbeat. She whispered, "We're already dead, aren't we?" The clerk appeared behind the desk, smiling faintly. His suit was spotless, but his features were blurred, as if painted with water on wet paper. "You checked in the moment you chose the road," he said calmly. "We've only been waiting." Marcus shouted at him, furious, terrified. "Why us? Why now?" The clerk tilted his head. "Every 30 years, the house requires new hosts. Payment is always collected in full." The ledger's third line filled. Daniel, his knees buckled. He wanted to tear the book apart, to smash it, but his body wouldn't move. His arms felt like stone. The clerk placed a brass pen gently on the counter, the smile never leaving his face. "One name remains. It will be written soon." Daniel turned toward Leah's key on the desk. The brass tag gleamed faintly in the dim light, her name etched deep. She hadn't returned, but the room knew exactly where she was. The silence in the lobby pressed heavy, like a weight on their chests. The chandelier's light dimmed until the room was awash in shadows. The ledger on the desk waited. 3 names already inked, 1 space left. Leah's key gleamed faintly on the counter, untouched. Daniel swallowed hard. "We can fight this. We don't have to accept it." Sarah shook her head slowly, her face pale. "You don't understand. We already did. The moment we stepped inside, the moment we took the keys." As if answering her, the walls groaned, stretching. The portraits lining the lobby shimmered, shifting until they showed Daniel, Sarah, Marcus, and Leah in fine oils, their expressions blank, eyes hollow. Marcus's voice cracked. "It's already written." The clerk smiled from behind the desk, though his face was still indistinct, always slipping from memory. He lifted a pale hand toward the ledger. "One more. That's all the house requires." Sarah stared at the blank line, then at Daniel. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "It won't stop unless one of us accepts it." "No!" Daniel stepped forward. "That's exactly what it wants." But Sarah's hands were already moving. She picked up the brass pen. Her reflection in the chandelier glass showed her husband's face standing behind her, whispering softly, urging her on. "Sarah, don't!" Daniel lunged forward. Too late. Her hand moved as though guided by another. The pen scratched across the page in elegant script. Leah. The final name glowed faintly as the ink sank into the parchment. A sound like a long sigh filled the hotel. The chandelier flared with light. The portraits solidified. Marcus screamed, but his voice was swallowed, cut short, as though the air had been sucked out of him. His body flickered, then vanished, leaving only the echo of his last cry. Sarah dropped the pen. Her face went blank, eyes dull, her body stiff as she turned and began walking upstairs. She didn't look back. Daniel staggered, grabbing the ledger, desperate to tear the page free. But the book closed itself with a slam, locking his fingers painfully. The clerk leaned forward, his blurred smile fixed. "Thank you for your stay," he whispered. The chandelier burst, glass raining down, and the lobby went dark. Months later, a pair of travelers drove that same mountain road. The storm came fast. Their GPS failed, and through the fog, they spotted the glow of a hotel sign. The Hollow Pines Hotel. Inside, the lobby was warm and welcoming. The chandelier glowed. The clerk stood at the desk, smiling faintly. 4 keys gleamed on the counter. The tags were already engraved. Daniel, Sarah, Marcus, Leah, just faintly.